Welcome back to the CISA Exam Prep Series. So today in Domain 4 Part B, we're going to dive into one of the most critical and heavily weighted topics on the exam, business resilience. So mastering this domain is essential as the exam will test your ability to evaluate an organization's resilience from an auditor's perspective. Now we'll move beyond the theory and we'll focus on how you provide assurance that a business can truly survive a major disruption, a key responsibility for any IS audit. We'll break down the entire resilience lifecycle, including the business impact analysis and key metrics like the RTO and RPO. We'll look at system resiliency techniques, data backup strategies, and the critical differences between a business continuity plan and a disaster recovery plan. And perhaps most importantly, we'll cover the testing methods and how to evaluate them from an auditor's perspective, as you'll quite probably be expected to do just that on the exam. Let's dig in. So here in Domain 4 Part B, we're focused on business resilience. And while you may know me from my exam prep content here on YouTube, in my 9 to 5, I'm a cybersecurity strategist and a vCISO for a regional bank where I'm exercising my cybersecurity knowledge every day, like that which you'll find here on the CISA exam. More importantly, last year I helped thousands achieve cybersecurity certifications, like the CISSP, CCSP, and the Security Plus exams, and I'm bringing that proven formula to you here with the CISA exam. As with all my exam prep courses, you'll find a PDF copy of this presentation available for you in the video description to leverage in your exam preparation as you require. You'll also find a clickable table of contents available in the video description, and it should appear automatically on your YouTube video timeline. As we discussed in our previous installment, Domain 4 is one of the most heavily weighted at a little more than a quarter of the full exam. And in our series of 5 domains and 10 installments, this puts us all the way at installment number 8. So let's look at the Domain 4B syllabus. Again, it focuses on business resilience. It's broken into 5 parts. We'll talk about business impact analysis, system resiliency, data backup, storage and restoration, the business continuity plan, and the disaster recovery plan. And these are all interrelated, so we'll certainly talk about the relationship between the lot. So let's start with business impact analysis. In fact, let's discuss business resilience just to set a foundation here. So resilience is an organization's ability to adapt to disruptions and to maintain continuous operations while protecting assets. It's a proactive approach that prevents IT incidents from becoming business catastrophes. It goes beyond simple disaster recovery plans for IT. It also accounts for how key business units will function during the disruption. So key components you as an auditor need to understand so you can analyze them competently include the business impact analysis, system and operational resilience, data backup and restoration, the business continuity plan, and the disaster recovery plan. And we'll talk about how the BIA, the BCP, and the DRP are related. So business impact analysis. This is the process where we evaluate which processes in the business are critical and which IT components support them. The goal here is to determine timeframes, priorities, resources, and interdependencies for recovery. So the core questions we need to answer in the business impact analysis are: what are the organization's critical business processes? What critical IT resources are related to these processes? What is the critical recovery period before unacceptable losses are suffered? That's what we call the maximum tolerable downtime, or MTD. So as an auditor, your role is to verify the business impact analysis process is comprehensive, that its outputs are accurate, and that it is sponsored and approved by senior management. Those are the folks that are going to go get the budget to pay for the business needs. So I want to just draw a picture for you here. If we look at business continuity management as a discipline, it really starts with the business impact analysis, where we are identifying those business critical services and the systems that support them. And there are a number of key metrics that we'll identify during the business impact analysis. Put a pin in those for a moment. The business continuity plan is the overall plan for the business, for business resilience. Within the business continuity plan exists the disaster recovery plan, which focuses on the technology that supports those larger business critical services and processes. And then we have to test and maintain these plans over time. Now, in those key metrics, the key outputs of the business impact analysis, the three metrics that are going to be most relevant to you, most important for this exam, are the recovery point objective, the recovery time objective, and the maximum tolerable downtime. So we'll dig into all three of those over the course of this session. So let's dig into system resiliency. So the conversation here really begins with the business impact analysis, a process that relies on gathering accurate information from the right people. There are several ways of gathering information. We can circulate questionnaires to key users in IT and end user areas. So end user means a business user in this conversation. We can conduct interviews with groups of key users. We can go talk to a business unit to discuss their critical services. We can have group meetings where we bring IT personnel and our business users together to reach a consensus on business impact, so we all understand which services and systems are critical and we understand those interdependencies. We have to analyze that data. It can be tabulated and analyzed to help us develop our business continuity plan and our disaster recovery plan so we can account for those critical services and systems. We'll often create what we call impact bands, where we evaluate the impact of downtime over time. We sort things into high, medium, low criticality, and we may assign financial impact to these various bands. At the end of the day, we want to identify system criticality and determine our RPO, our RTO, and that maximum tolerable downtime. So let's talk about the cost of disruption. So who decides criticality? Well, the business process owner is the most authoritative source, generally speaking. How is criticality indicated? Well, supporting human health and safety, always our first priority. Human safety is always number one. For example, if we were dealing with hospital patient records, that maps to human health and safety. If disruption causes significant loss of income or unacceptable cost, that's going to be high criticality. If the process is required for legal or statutory compliance, that's going to be high criticality. Some examples of system classification. Critical means it cannot be performed manually. So that system performs a function that cannot be replaced with manual effort, so the tolerance to interruption is going to be very low. Vital, in this case, the process can be performed manually for a brief period, say for a certain number of days. Sensitive, the process can be performed manually for an extended period, but with difficulty. And then a non-sensitive system would be one that can be interrupted for an extended period with little to no cost. So there's a cost trade-off with business impact analysis. So downtime costs increase rapidly over time. We lose sales, idle resources, reputational damage to the business, all happen and increase over time. Recovery costs, the cost of being prepared for this, redundant systems and backup sites, are going to be lower for longer recovery times. So generally speaking, if I need to recover very quickly, the solution is going to be more expensive and more complex. My goal with the business impact analysis is to help the organization choose the point where the total cost curve, the downtime and recovery, is at a minimum. So on the exam, you're not going to be tested on actual calculation of cost. However, you do need to understand the inverse relationship between the cost of downtime and the cost of recovery. Let me give you a visual that I think may help here. because we really need to understand how cost of downtime and cost of recovery relate. So here we have an X and Y axis. On one we have cost and complexity and length of service interruption. So we have an acceptable recovery cost. This is the budget established by the organization. We have the recovery time objective. That point we're establishing where the business really must have this service to recover. I mentioned that the cost of business impact increases over time, right? However, the solutions that we can use to recover, the longer we can wait, the less expensive and less complex those solutions tend to be. So in this chart, when we've established our recovery time objective, I can really choose any recovery method that falls below acceptable recovery cost and to the left of the recovery time objective. So in this case, for example, I could choose warm site or a pilot light, which is really just minimal infrastructure in a data center. But if we have a service that's very critical, if I start moving that recovery time objective back to the left here, meaning a shorter time, you notice my options are fewer. And in this case, you can see that in fact, I have no options that fall below the acceptable recovery cost and to the left of recovery time objective. So at that point, I would either have to go get more money from management, or I would have to convince them that we needed to move that recovery time objective out to the right again. So that's the inverse relationship. I hope that is helpful to visualize. So let's talk about system and operational resilience. So the ability of a system to withstand, adapt to, and recover from unexpected disruptions while maintaining its core functions, that's system and operational resilience. It encompasses the capacity to absorb shocks and recover quickly under adverse conditions. Now, we build these with redundant components, with failover mechanisms, and data backup strategies to ensure continuous operation wherever we can. We're looking for redundancy, failover, and backup. So as an auditor, understanding the capabilities of the various technologies in each area will help you more effectively assess the customer's system resiliency. Similar to that example I talked about in 4A, if you know nothing about a nuclear reactor, assessing resilience around a nuclear reactor will be very difficult for you. So when we talk about system resiliency, concepts like clustering, for example, you have to understand the basics to competently assess the impact to resilience for the business. So clustering, for example, is software installed on multiple servers, or nodes we call them sometimes, to provide higher availability and protect against a single point of failure. Clustering is very commonly used with relational database technologies. And there are different deployment types. We can implement an active-passive cluster where the application runs on one active node. The other passive nodes are on standby and take over only if the active node fails. There's active-active. That's where the application runs on every node, providing both high availability and load balancing. So we're going to have greater capacity in that case. But this also requires the application to be cluster aware. There's geo-clustering. So clusters can actually span cities, countries, or continents to protect against site failure. And there are actually different PaaS or platform as a service database technologies in the cloud where geo-clustering can be implemented with a few clicks of the mouse. So let's talk network resiliency. So there's alternative routing, so routing information via an alternate medium such as cellular or microwave as a backup to our fiber optic lines. There's diverse routing, so this is routing traffic through split or duplicate cable facilities that follow different physical paths to avoid a single point of failure like a cable cut. Pretty common that we'll see in a cloud data center or even a high availability corporate data center that we have different points of ingress for cables from different internet providers. Last mile circuit protection, so redundant connections from the telecom provider to the organization's building. Long haul network diversity, so using multiple long distance carriers to prevent a single carrier failure from disrupting service. In the data center sense, we have two different internet service providers bring connectivity into the data center. So from an audit perspective, remember it's the organization's responsibility, not the provider's, to ensure it has adequate network backup capabilities. The organization has to do their due diligence here. All right, let's move on to number 3 in the list, data backup, storage, and restoration. Oftentimes, data is the most critical asset for the organization, and our goal is that the backup and restoration strategy has to align with our recovery point objective and our recovery time objective from the business impact analysis. There are a few techniques we can use, immutable backups, which are actually a critical control against ransomware. So once the data is written, the backup data is fixed and it can't be altered or deleted even by an administrator. So we call that immutable. There's the 3-2-1 strategy. This is a best practice for ensuring data survival in a number of circumstances. We have 3 copies of the data on 2 different media types with 1 copy kept offsite. Backup schemes are something we need to think about. There's the full backup. This is a backup of all files and folders. It's going to be fastest and simplest in terms of restoration. It's going to be the slowest backup time, and it's also going to require the most storage. There's an incremental backup where we get all the changes since the last backup of any type, full or incremental. So we're just getting the incremental change in data each time we back up. This is going to be fastest for backup. It uses the least storage. It's going to be slower and the most complex restoration strategy. It requires the last full backup and then each and every incremental backup. So if I take a full backup once a week and I take an incremental backup the other 6 days, I have to have all 6 incrementals plus the full to recover. And then in the middle, I have an option called the differential backup. This captures all changes since the last full backup. It's going to be faster restoration versus incremental because I simply need the last full backup and the last differential. So if I take a full backup once a week and I take a differential each of the other 6 days, I simply need the latest differential backup in addition to that full to recover. It will be slower than incremental in terms of backup because the backup size grows each day. So I wanted to give you just a visual here for exam day. So here we have full, differential, and incremental compared. So you can see the backup speed, the storage space, and the restore speed and simplicity. So you'll notice the full backup is the slowest backup speed, but it's the fastest restore. Incremental is fastest backup speed, but slowest and most complex restore. And differential lies there in the middle. So let's talk about data storage resiliency. So with physical disks, we have RAID, the redundant array of independent disks. So this combines multiple physical disks into logical units for redundancy and performance. If you have any experience with server computing hardware, you're probably familiar with RAID. It enables physical storage to survive single disk failure. And the most common RAID options are RAID 0, 1, 5, and then what we call RAID 10, which is RAID 0 plus 1. If you have zero exposure to RAID, I'm going to put a link to a short YouTube video that explains the concept to you, just in case you need it. So replication is where we replicate our storage to multiple locations. So there's synchronous replication, where the local write is not confirmed until the data is successfully written to the remote site. This guarantees zero data loss, but it requires high bandwidth. And then there's asynchronous replication, where data is replicated on a scheduled basis. It allows for some data loss, and it's less demanding on the network. So we really have to determine what our ability is to lose something more than zero data. Backup media would be a consideration. So tapes, removable hard drives, and disk-based systems like virtual tape libraries or snapshots. And many times we're not using our own physical media. Oftentimes we can back up directly to cloud. But in a data center, we're often going to be using some form of physical media, in which case we need to think about a rotation method. A common strategy there is the grandfather, father, son method, for rotating our backup media. So that would mean the son would be a daily, father, weekly, grandfather, monthly. So it's son, father, grandfather from smallest to largest. So that could be weekly, monthly, yearly, for example. So the time period could differ, but that's how son, father, grandfather works. So in terms of offsite controls, the offsite library has to have secure physical access, environmental controls, so temperature, humidity, etc., and an inventory of all media. Our backup media should be encrypted at all times if possible. So let's talk business continuity plan. So what is it exactly? Well, it's a comprehensive organization-wide plan to sustain essential business operations during and after a disruption. Who owns this plan? Senior management is ultimately responsible for the business continuity plan. So the scope of the BCP addresses all functions and assets required for the organization to survive, including people, processes, and technology. The ultimate priority here is the protection of human life. Human life comes first. It is the most essential aspect. It takes precedence over all other recovery methods. From an auditor's perspective, the single best way for an auditor to determine the effectiveness of a business continuity plan is by reviewing the results of previous tests. I'm going to hit on that point from multiple perspectives over the course of this session. Just like with a data backup, the best way to know that you have a good data backup is to restore it and make sure that the process works as designed. The best way to make sure that a business continuity plan works as designed is to test it. So we will talk about the different types of tests today as well. So business continuity plan versus disaster recovery plan. What is the difference? We saw that the disaster recovery plan in our visual falls within the business continuity plan, right? So the business continuity plan focuses on the entire organization. IT systems and infrastructure are covered within the disaster recovery plan. So that's just the technology. So really the business continuity is focused on the larger business processes and people. The disaster recovery plan really focuses more on the systems that support the business processes and people. The purpose of the BCP is to continue business functions. The disaster recovery plan is focused on restoring IT capacity. And again, BCP is that overarching strategic plan. The DRP is a technical subcomponent of business continuity. So there's that visual just to lock that in for game day. So let's talk about our business continuity plan development and testing. So our BCP is going to be based on the outputs of our business impact analysis, and it should be documented in simple language and include procedures, responsibilities, and contact information. After all, when we actually execute our business continuity plan, it will be under stressful circumstances. It will be something of an orchestra where many players are working together, so everyone needs to understand their roles and their tasks at a very granular level. From a testing perspective, an untested BCP is an unreliable plan. The goal is to evaluate the plan's effectiveness and the performance of personnel. There are a few different types of tests we can use for our BCP. So a desk-based or paper test, this is essentially a paper walkthrough of the plan with key personnel. There's preparedness or simulation tests. This is a localized test or a role-playing exercise where actual resources are used to simulate a crash, but without a full interruption. And then there's a full operational test where the primary site is actually shut down and operations are moved to the recovery site. That's the most thorough, but it's also the most disruptive test, of course. So what's the auditor's role in auditing the business continuity plan? Well, you'll review the BCP to ensure it aligns with business objectives and the business impact analysis conclusions and outputs. You'll evaluate the plan for adequacy, currency, and completeness. Does it really cover all of the critical business services and the systems upon which those services depend? You'll review the results from previous tests to verify effectiveness. Again, an untested plan is a weak plan. We don't get better information on the adequacy of a BCP beyond that test. That is the final word. You'll evaluate off-site storage facilities for proper security and environmental controls. You'll interview key personnel to confirm they understand their roles and responsibilities in the business continuity plan and its execution. And you will review contracts for alternate sites and insurance coverage for adequacy to make sure that the organization is protected. Your role, if I were to summarize, is to provide assurance to the organization over the BCP so that they have adequately addressed critical business functions in that business continuity plan. Let's talk about the disaster recovery plan now. This one focuses on the technology that supports those business processes. So we have the recovery time objective, the RTO I mentioned. This is the maximum acceptable downtime for a system after a disaster is declared. It answers the question, how quickly must we be back online? Then there is the recovery point objective. This is the maximum acceptable amount of data loss measured in time. So it answers the question, how much data can we afford to lose? For example, is a loss of 4 hours of data acceptable? So how far back can we go and still recover successfully? So the relationship here, the RTO and the RPO are outputs of that business impact analysis, and they dictate the cost and type of recovery solution needed. And you remember we talked about the inverse relationship in the cost of our recovery solution and the time that we have in that recovery time objective. Just to distill that one more time for exam day, lower recovery time and recovery point values mean higher recovery solution costs. So a near zero recovery time objective requires an expensive solution like a mirrored site, where a 24-hour recovery time objective can be met with a much cheaper warm site. That being said, let's talk recovery site alternatives. So we have the mirrored site. That's a fully redundant site with real-time data replication, fully staffed and equipped, recovery time near zero. We'll see many organizations accomplish this using the public cloud as their mirrored backup site. There's the hot site, fully equipped data center. It needs current data to be loaded, recovery time minutes to hours. The warm site, partially equipped facility with infrastructure, needs hardware, software, and data, recovery in hours to days. We have the cold site, essentially an empty facility with space and basic infrastructure. It's got HVAC, it's got power, little to no equipment, recovery time in weeks to months often. We have a reciprocal agreement, so sharing facilities with another company where each company agrees to help the other in the event of an impact. The recovery time here is unreliable, to be frank. So from an exam perspective, note two things. Reciprocal agreements are very seldom used today, and they are generally speaking not considered a viable option due to security, resource, and compatibility conflicts. So let's talk about disaster recovery testing. Like with business continuity, testing is mandatory to ensure the plan will work. So I want to talk about the different types of tests, and we'll look at them in their order from progressively least disruptive to the most disruptive. So there's the checklist review, where we distribute checklists to team members to ensure they're current, not disruptive at all. The structured walkthrough. The team reviews the plan on paper step by step to find gaps. Generally speaking, the way that structured walkthrough plays out is everyone gets in a room and the person leading the structured walkthrough throws out a disaster scenario. Often the person leading the structured walkthrough is the only one who knows the scenario they're going to play through before the time they actually do it. But they'll get in a conference room and walk through it together to find gaps. There's the simulation test. It's a scenario-based role-playing exercise without activating the recovery site. So what these all have in common right now is that they're all talk. There's no real flipping of buttons on our technology. So that changes when we get to number 4, the parallel test. The recovery site here is activated and runs in parallel with the primary site, which continues normal operations. And then there's the full interruption test, where the primary site is shut down and all operations are failed over to the recovery site. The way we see that play out in the real world is most organizations will try to perform a full interruption test annually to make sure that they can actually run from that alternate site. I've even worked with one company where they fail over once a year and they run from the alternate site for a week to make sure that it really takes. So, review test plans, observe execution where possible, evaluate documented results to ensure objectives were met and improvements are made. So as the auditor, you're making sure that those plans have been tested and they actually work. So let's talk about your focus in evaluating those test results. So formal documentation is important. You want to first verify that all phases of the test, pre-test, test, post-test, were fully documented. And quantitative metrics are used. So test results have to be measured quantitatively, including, did the recovery effort meet the predefined recovery time objective? Was all the required data successfully recovered, and did it meet the recovery point objective? So remember, recovery point is how far back we can go in terms of data loss. So the amount or throughput of work, was the recovery site able to process the required amount of work and handle the necessary transaction volume? And then accuracy, was the data entry and the processing at the recovery site as accurate as it would be under normal circumstances? The post-test follow-up. So the evaluation, your evaluation, is not complete until you're satisfied, until you verify that a follow-up process is in place. You'll look for evidence that any problems or deficiencies found during the test led to formal recommendations, and that those recommendations were used to update and improve the disaster recovery plan. At the end of the day, auditor analysis provides assurance of the disaster recovery plan effectiveness in practice to the business, so they know that they have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. All right, my friends, that's what I have for you for Domain 4B. I hope you're getting value from the series as always. If you have questions, drop me a line in the comments, ping me on LinkedIn. Happy to help anywhere I can. I'll be back to you with Domain 5 Part A in just a couple of days. And until next time, take care and stay safe.